It is Sunday afternoon, September 1st, 2019. Major Hurricane Dorian continues to intensify. It is now a Category 5 powerhouse hurricane. There it is in the center of your screen there on the satellite imagery. It resembles a buzzsaw moving through the northern end of the Bahamas. And as the recording of this video, we have landfall, Elbow Cay in the Bahamas. Within the last hour, you can see that eye wall moving onshore there. We've seen numerous gust reports at the ground that I'm going to show you in a second, up and over 100 miles per hour. Officially, the intermediate update coming from the National Hurricane Center, we have those winds up to 185 miles per hour sustained. Gusts up to around 220. We're talking about EF4 tornado winds. Not just for a couple of minutes, but for hours. Devastation is occurring here as we speak, and it's going to continue to push on through the Bahamas and even slow down in the next 24 hours. So really keep folks here in your thoughts and prayers in the coming days. I mean, devastation occurring as we speak here. That west movement at around 8 miles per hour. Something that's also been extremely interesting is the pressure has been dropping. It may end up sub 900 millibars, which is very, very rare for these storms. All right, here's a look at some of the ground observations through the Bahamas. And you look at the last frame here, Marsh Harbor clocked a wind speed of 127 miles per hour. We'll be lucky to get through the next couple of hours without any of these going dark and losing transmission because of power outages or even just the sites getting destroyed. We saw that in Puerto Rico. The actual Doppler radar got blown to pieces when Maria moved through back in 2017. Great Abaco here, Grand Bahama. All of these under the gun here as this is moving due west and will impact this entire area with multiple landfalls there. And as you saw, also catastrophic storm surge. That's the wording from the National Hurricane Center. 19 to 23-foot storm surge. That'll inundate almost the entire island there. We are now in radar range from U.S. radar sites. We're pulling this one from Miami. You can see that well-defined eye wall structure there moving in over the Marsh Harbor area. Very circular, very symmetrical. The strongest of the winds, even though the resolution is pretty bad this far out. We're on the farthest edge of that range, but this is where you're finding the strongest winds right now. Winds almost go calm right in the center of the eye. And then once you get that back eye wall moving on through, the winds shift direction and are almost nearly as strong as that first eye wall passage there. So Marsh Harbor right now just getting absolutely wrecked. Bigger picture right now, we're seeing the hurricane force wind field expanding, extends out to around 45 miles out from the center. Tropical storm force winds extending out 140 miles from that center. That center of Dorian is only about 190 miles to the east of the coast, the east coast of Florida. So when you look at those tropical storm force winds coming out 140 miles, tropical storm force winds reach up to only 50 miles offshore of that Florida coastline. The storm itself about 330 miles now in diameter, and it is certainly starting to resemble an annular hurricane. That's when you don't really see the banding or the outflow channels extending out like you'd see on a normal hurricane. It's kind of harder to weaken a storm like this, and it's very, very intense as it moves on through. And it looks like that donut with that hole in the middle or a buzzsaw. We've seen several annular hurricanes in the past. In fact, I believe Barbara earlier this season in the Pacific was an annular hurricane at some point in its life. The eye diameter there on this particular image, we're clocking about 20 miles, but the official advisory from the Hurricane Center puts it at 15 nautical miles. We're looking at the infrared imagery here. If we switch it up and show the actual visible satellite, it is a little bit smaller, and it is moving right over Marsh Harbor right now, made landfall in Elbow Cay. And, you know, right over Marsh Harbor right now, the sun is coming out probably. Seeing some glimpses of sunshine there. The winds have died down, but as I mentioned, as that secondary eye wall passage moves on through, those winds will switch direction and be just as intense there, of course, too. Also, I want to show you here in the last image or so, you noticed how that eye was very clear as it was out over the open water still. Now with that minor interaction with land, maybe it's starting to disrupt the overall machine that Dorian is and could possibly lead to weakening it. That's a possibility there, but of course it's already done its damage out through Grand Abacos there. I mean, Marsh Island, look at that. can see the clearing and even the clouding up a little bit with some of that land interaction. All right, there's the GOES 16 imagery. It was beautiful, showing that overall symmetry there in that eye wall, and it's continuing to push its way west at around 6 miles per hour. Now one of the strongest hurricanes on record in regards to the highest sustained winds. In the North Atlantic, that was Allen back in 1980. That had 190 mile per hour sustained winds. Will we get there with Dorian? It's hard to say. I mean, some people don't think that Dorian has reached its peak intensity just yet. And I'm going to show you why as we go a little bit further out in time here on Futurecast in a minute. Worldwide, Patricia holds the record for the strongest with sustained winds. That was 2015. Had sustained winds out in the Pacific of 215 miles per hour. And since 1950, there's been 3 Atlantic hurricanes with maximum winds, sustained winds, stronger than 180. That was Allen that we just talked about. Gilbert and Wilma, both of those had 185 mile per hour winds, which is where Dorian currently sits. Some more records here. Category 5 hurricanes in the Atlantic within the last decade. Matthew in 2016, Irma 2017, Maria that same year, Michael last year, and now Dorian. That makes it 4 years in a row that there has been a Category 5 hurricane in the Atlantic. That is a new record. We have watches and warnings all over the place now. First up now over Florida. The first U.S. landmass here, the continental United States, getting some watches and warnings up here. Purple or pink is now the hurricane warning. Hurricane watches in the reds, tropical storm warnings back inland over towards Lake Okeechobee and Fort Myers area, headed towards there, not quite towards the west coast of Florida just yet. And, of course, those warnings up and over all of the Bahamas, or the northern Bahamas at least. Are there any opportunities for this to weaken? Well, as we just talked about with the visible imagery, it looks like maybe there could be some land interruption there, overall disrupting the breathing, the ventilation of the storm. So that could lead to some minor weakening. Also, we've been watching for eye wall replacement cycles. It's been interesting that we have not seen Dorian go through one at all. Very rare for that to happen. Very, very rare. So if one was to occur, that would lead to some brief weakening in the overall intensity as the eye wall collapses in on itself, but then it is replaced in about 24 hours worth of time or less with a larger eye, and that usually leads to a bit of strengthening and even an expansion of the wind field and the overall size of the storm. So it could lead to some brief weakening if it does actually happen, and something called upwelling. That's going to come in more into play as the forward speed continues to slow on down. We have plenty of fuel out there in terms of warm sea surface temperatures, about a degree above average, 84 to 86, and that heat, the heat energy at least, extends down to a depth. The ocean heat content is plenty here. But as it starts to slow itself down, it's going to create something called the upwelling. Okay, and that's something in the next 24 hours that could lead to some very minor weakening. It's going to stir up, it's going to mix up the ocean with those very strong winds, and eventually it'll pull in, possibly, if it does do this, some cooler waters from depths and mix it up to the surface, cooling down the ocean temperatures and limiting the amount of fuel. The thing is that this can only happen pretty much within the next 24 hours or so, because as it edges ever so slowly and then eventually stalls out, it's going to encounter the Gulf Stream. And what that's going to do, even with the slow movement, the Gulf Stream will replenish the warm waters at depth continually. So, I mean, we may not have seen the peak intensity here for Dorian just yet. Here is the 12:45 p.m. update from the National Hurricane Center that has those 185 mile per hour winds, gusts to 220. The track itself, if you've been paying attention to this, which I'm sure a lot of you have if you're watching these videos over and over again, the overall track has shifted ever so slightly back west towards the coastline. Still, all of the east coast of Florida is in that cone of uncertainty. Keep in mind the cone here is for where the center of Dorian will end up. We saw that the diameter of the storm is up and over 350 miles. So even if the center was right here, you're seeing those effects way out from the center of the storm, and we could see those effects right through central Florida. If that center tracks on the left side of the cone, on the west side of the cone, you could be talking a landfalling major hurricane still in the cards along the east coast of Florida. Of course, the other option, it could be farther out to the east and limiting those issues along the eastern seaboard there. What will happen, still yet to be seen. That northwards turn will be that all-determining factor. Once it does turn north, it's expected to straddle the southeast coast of the United States, eventually beginning to weaken and pick up forward speed, which is some good news. It will get picked up by that incoming trough, that front off to the north and west, and usher it out to sea. But even way out here, day 5, where the error is about 400 miles, the entire diameter here, you're looking at winds still a high-end Category 1, with sustained of 90 miles per hour, potentially at that point, sitting off the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And of course, that cone is large. It could be back inland. It could be farther off to the south and east, not affecting anybody. We'll see what happens here as things play on out. I want to show you the computer models here. These are all the tropical models. Each line is a different computer model. This is going to be this morning's run. And then I want to show you the most recent run. Notice that ever so subtle track back off towards the west and closer to the southeast coastline. This is mimicked in the GFS ensembles as well as the European model. There is some subtleties to that westward kind of correction closer to the coastline. So we'll see if that plays out or if that's a trend that will continue getting closer to the east coast of Florida and the southeastern United States. Here's how it plays out on both of the big global models. The American, the GFS, shows the system stalling on out here. And as we play it out in time, here we are at Monday at noon. So tomorrow on Labor Day, go right on through Tuesday at 7 a.m. We are still stalled out, going on 24 hours of a stall out in this area. Starts to lift its way northwards, only about 50 to 80 miles off the coast of Florida, the center of Dorian. So we're looking at those tropical storm, if not hurricane force winds, moving up and over Cape Canaveral, closer to Daytona Beach, and then just kind of raking the southeast coastline with strong winds. Those onshore winds here over towards Charleston, Savannah, causing storm surge issues. And that's going to continue to be the trend as it moves off towards the north and east and eventually impacting southeastern Virginia, northeastern North Carolina. Prolonged onshore wind flow here will lead to some major coastal flooding here in these areas. And as those winds turn around coming in out of the north, it's going to drain the water out of the Chesapeake Bay and lead to some bayside flooding, especially down through North Carolina as well as it exits out into the middle of the Atlantic. How about the European? Very similar, although shows a stall out for a little while longer. Again, here we are starting at noon tomorrow on Labor Day. We go right on through Tuesday at noon, pretty much still in the exact same place. Also, where the stall out occurs is very, very crucial. If it is over Grand Bahamas, that land interaction could, as well as upwelling, could limit its intensity and weaken it. If it's just south of there, where it's still over the very warm waters, the Gulf Stream starting to come into play here, we could see it maintaining its intensity. Then it moves pretty much along the same track up the east coast of Florida and then southeast coastline, kind of hugging the coast and then moving up into northeastern North Carolina and Virginia with the same sort of thing there. Heavy rain, gusty wind, storm surge potential. Let's talk wind potential now. We're going to use the GFS numbers on this one. All up along the east coast of Florida, seeing those winds at tropical storm force, if not a little bit stronger than that. As it moves off to the north, that wind field will start to expand as it gains latitude. And you see those gusts along the coastlines there up and over 40, 50, and even you see Hatteras there coming up to 67 miles per hour. This is just a model run. They could certainly be stronger than that depending on the exact track. Rainfall, coastal locations as seen by the GFS, seeing the brunt of the heaviest of the rain. You couple that with storm surge, you have issues. That extends all the way up, and as it tracks maybe even over southeastern parts of North Carolina, that rain could really be an issue too. We're talking 5 to 10 plus inches of rainfall here if this verifies. The European, similar to that, hugging the coast with those strongest or those highest rainfall totals and lifting to the north, more of the same, just slightly less, talking 6+ inches of rain, which is still a lot. A lot still to unfold here in the next 24 to 72 hours. So it's going to be a long duration event here. You can find me on social media in between then. If you have questions, have family or friends down in the Bahamas, you want to know what the conditions are looking like, or along the east coast of Florida, always happy to answer your questions. Meteorologist Tim Pandages or on Twitter. Also be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel and share it with your friends so everybody can stay up to date on what Dorian is doing next.